All right, this is Sacred Frames. Sean Palmer, Jeff Cook, and the movie Mike Yeager. We're talking about the fantastic new film from Zach Cregger, Weapons. We're going to start with some quick non-spoiler thoughts because most of our discussion is going to be filled with spoilers. So, Mike, why don't you take us away? What's your non-spoiler thoughts for this movie to get us started?
Oh goodness! Well, yeah, I think we're going to take a few moments here off the top because and thank you for being here. And we are shifting this month into this mode of allegorical horror. So we're talking about weapons. We're going to be discussing Jaws later in the month. There is talk of a bonus episode around Sinners, the big hit of this year. So we're going to have a number of different vantage points and directions to enter into this genre, and it's one that is, I think, a really important one for us to deal with in this conversation. As we're talking about movies from a theological standpoint, from trying to tease out the voice of the divine within it, and this is naturally a genre that a lot of people are going to have an understandable and natural aversion to because of the horrific nature of it, of the oftentimes the ultra violence or the demonic imagery, otherworldly, the evil imagery to it. But my jumping off point, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts from this, is an important genre for us to engage with because of that very question, that this is a genre in which we reckon with our fears and anxieties, the things that we cannot see or control or understand, and that's on a societal level, cultural level, historical, and then the just personal demons that prey upon each and every one of us in our own ways and times. And so I guess I put that to you: is what would your Christian ethic, quote unquote, be for a responsible, discerning engagement with the genre of horror?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty deep question. Maybe only one better suited for Jeff to respond to as the resident philosopher of the group.
I got an answer. I got an answer.
Okay,
You go.
so good. Um, because I was thinking about, and I shared with the two of you that I really didn't want to see this movie because I don't like horror movies. But I started to investigate my own response to it being out. Like, I just don't go see horror movies. Like, I think Megan, when it came out last year, was like the scariest thing in the world. Because I remember watching a movie when I was a kid where those little green toy soldiers, the very small ones, I don't know if you grew up with these. There was a movie where they came to life, and that movie still haunts me. I'm 51 freaking years old, right? But as I was getting ready, like geared up, like literally armoring up inside to go see Weapons because I knew that we were covering it, I wanted to interrogate my own statements about that. And the reality is, like, when I was like in my office right now, in my house, you will see Stephen King books all over the place. And when I was in high school, it was Stephen King and John Grisham that kept me reading. And so there was like a certain, what I realized is that I remember reading Pet Cemetery and watching the movie and reading The Shining and all of those things. Like, I like the reading aspect of it more because it was like I could control it. Like, if I got scared, I could just stop reading, right? Or like you just skip this passage or whatever. And I think for me, I was raised in terms of my faith development in churches that meant well, but really tried to scare you into avoiding hell rather than to embracing heaven. And even now, some of my theological beliefs, I'm often find myself scared to change theological beliefs, even though I think the new conclusion I have arrived at is stronger, but because I have been anchored in a certain kind of fear, and fear is such a powerful emotion. And so in communication, right, you guys know as people who speak to audiences, right, there is this technique we call anchoring, where like you give people a reality and anchor them to it, and then you lead them from that reality. Um, and I left Weapons thinking I really ought to watch more horror films because one, it
Hmm.
wasn't that scary to me in the moment, even though I did have dreams that night. I saw it with my daughter, and it has produced more conversation both internally and with other people than almost anything else that I've seen this year besides Sinners. And two movies, these two horror movies, have generated the most conversation and given me the most introspection. And I thought for that reason alone, I need to be more investigative about the genre.
Jeff?
That's solid. I think that's a great reflection. My answer is going to be real brief. That the question of whether or not you should watch horror is, does this make you a better person? And if it does, then absolutely you should watch more horror. Myself, do not have
That's such a philosopher answer.
so pithy, so curt, and yet so wise. The thing about lots of my hangups is as well, coming out of a certain ethical Christian tradition, is those need to get reexamined with a better framework. And the better framework is, does this make you a better person? Is it making you more like Christ? Is it helping you love people better? This movie is absolutely pushing you into those spaces. In fact, yelling about the fact that you don't, and doing so in a way that is cutting. It's pushing into the spaces that we don't want to go. I do not want to have this conversation with you two today for the most part, and that's how good the movie is.
Is it the Joker question?
Todd Phillips, I think you're thinking, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, he says he wanted to make a movie about mental health that no one would be willing to make. And so if he wrapped it in a comic book character, he could make that movie. And like that lingers with me whenever these kinds of works, and the three of us and people who would bother to listen and watch a show like this do see movies as a as a form of art more than just a simple recreation, right? Is that what, Jeff, is that what you're saying that Zach Cregger is doing here in Weapons? Like, he is saying, these are important questions. Either I can't express those questions on my own, or I can't get people to pay attention to those questions unless I wrap it in this package that, as Buechner would say, like to tell it slant.
One of the quotes that comes back to me a lot is that World War I vets coming back from seeing the new horrors of mechanized warfare couldn't talk about the face of evil when they returned home. And so instead they started writing fantasy. And so Tolkien, Lewis, who wrote Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, William Goldman,
these gentlemen can't talk about what they see without allegorizing some of it and bringing out a different kind of face so that we can see it as it is, because some things are so obvious that they can't be actually said, apparently. And I think that was one of the big things I took away from this movie, is there are some things that are just so obvious we can't talk about.
And I think that's a really great point to get us started as well, Jeff, because we are now occupying a world where all of us are more and more inundated and more aware of this myriad of global horrors, national horrors, just horrors within this shared human story. And that awareness can lead us to that place of just shutting down or pulling away, avoiding, denying. And so this genre then becomes the way where we reckon with these unknowable questions, these things that we don't have a safe container for, or a seemingly safe container for elsewhere, but we can we can put these categories within something where 2 hours down the line, and it at least seems for the time being that evil has been pushed back, that wave has ebbed out. For now, we're never naive enough to think that it is gone forever, but we can take a breath for the time being. And I think that that's what people are really looking for, whether or not they realize that they're looking for it. This thrill it creates a kind of catharsis that gives us a container for our fears, or even, in the case of like we're not going to be talking slasher movies, but like that's a safe container for our malice, for our judgment, for our desire to inflict retribution or judgment upon the other. And we can do that vicariously through a, Ghostface or a Michael Myers or what have you, because these people on some level deserve it.
And I think that's a really important distinction you make there, Mike, because like what we're not talking about is I Know What You Did Last Summer, which is just sort of like a gratuitous kind of approach to horrors, like blood and gore. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when the first one came out, and Jennifer Love Hewitt was like a teenager or barely above a teenager, and she's wearing like this crop top and all this. I remember the interview in the with at the time, and her asking the director like, "Why do I have to wear this?" And the director saying, "Well, there are parts of you that a 15-year-old boy are interested in." Like that was, like that's different from weapons.
Yeah,
And
very.
so even though there are scenes in weapons that are kind of gory, there is
Kinda.
a certain yeah, kind of gory. There is a certain approach to them that's saying like we're not doing that.
Yeah,
We're not like we're Cregger
kinda.
is actually trying to say something and to work something out, even if it's just within himself, which we can talk about that later. But you caught something, Mike, in the film at the beginning and the end that I did not catch because we saw this together the first time we saw it. So I'm sitting there, you're on one side of me, my daughter's on the other side. And so I'm really interested in your take on the part you noticed that I didn't.
When the opening title card, the logo, comes up for the film Weapons, within the O, all of a sudden becomes just superimposed this triangle, which is not going to be something that is recognizable for a broad swath of the audience. However, I am coming to this conversation as someone who is in long-term recovery from alcoholism, and that may come up from time to time as is relevant to the films that we discuss. And my hope is that if you're hearing this and this is a part of your journey, you've got someone to talk to or some kind of fellowship to walk through that with, because that very invitation, whether it is received and accepted or denied, that invitation into community within the structures of suffering and the structures of isolation in our lives, what the characters do is profoundly important to their ultimate fates within Zach Cregger's film here. And we'll talk about, I think, 6, maybe 7 lead characters, and that's relevant to the film because it is told on very episodically. Is each of the characters is kind of given a highlight, and then Cregger is really brilliantly, in terms of the dramatic construction of the film, jumping back into different perspectives and timelines and allowing us to piece together these horrific events from a number of different kind of perspectival points, but all of which I think are reckoning or not with the category of addiction. And I'd love to tease that out more. You guys, before we get into the spoiler territory, what are your broadest thoughts on Zach Cregger's film Weapons?
My last non-spoiler thoughts is twofold. One, there is a rich part of the New Testament that does what Cregger's doing, and that is to use very violent stories to communicate truths to audiences that don't want to listen, or that you have to say something in such a subversive way that it cuts through. And so the very last book of the Bible seems to have that quality at times. And even in the stories of Jesus, he's telling stories about rich people who die and go to places where they are on fire. And that is a horrific kind of image that is meant to cut through some of the issues and cultural norms of the time. The second thing I really wanted to hit was that I think Stephen King and his influence is more profound than I think I have thought. Coming out of this movie, I was like, his work is all over this movie, but it's as though the storytellers of today have learned from this man almost uniformly and are telling stories in that way, in ways that King was showing them how to tell stories that really matter. And King has hit lots of topics that have, we're discovering over and again had huge importance that we needed to think about, from his reflections in The Stand to, you know, what he wants to say about alcoholism in The Shining, or, I mean, we could go down the list, but it's that he has given a different kind of gift, and it's, here's how you tell stories that cut through to mass audiences that are still deeply informed with values that we need to discuss at a different kind of level. So those were the two big ideas, non-spoiler, that were hitting me.
You know, I think for me, one of the huge pieces that stands out really is about, I mean, when someone deploys children as victims,
Mm-hmm.
that says something. And this is all in the trailer, so this is not a spoiler. But I'm taken back to Birmingham, Alabama, and the Children's March during the Civil Rights Movement, and all the pushback that King got about quote unquote using children. But we forget, like we use the word protest for the civil rights movements, but that's not what they
Right.
used. King talked about these are demonstrations.
Mm.
And so the Children's March was to demonstrate how depraved Southern society had become. And so that's really, you know, that's not a deep read of the text for weapons, but it's one that I want to make sure that people don't miss. Because when something happens to children, and particularly white children in America,
Mm-hmm.
there is a kind of reaction that points to, signals to, hopefully, what people consider our greatest or deepest values around things. So I feel like he's definitely trying to figure out, Cregger is definitely trying to work through what our values are around what is perceived to be like our deepest connection and most important, most vulnerable um, persons in our society. So I think that's important.
Yep. I think it's deeply important. I would love to bring it back up later, because there is a singular event worth naming in which said white children were affected that didn't get quite the response we might hope for. And that's going to come into play, I think, in our discussion. So,
Right.
all right.
So we
Go ahead.
are in Maybrook, Pennsylvania, I believe, as the story begins, and we are told that Justine Gandy, a new third grade teacher.
Actually, Mike,
Yes.
we are supposed to believe that we're in Maybrook, but we are actually in Atlanta,
Okay. Well, sure, understood.
where
But
this is
aren't we
filmed.
aren't we
And
always in Atlanta these days, though?
we're always in Atlanta, and I want to say just publicly that Zach Cregger like wanted something that looked like Prisoners, and this movie very much does look like Prisoners. Everyone should go watch Prisoners, and he
Denny
did not feel
Villeneuve.
like he could move. He could not move the production to Atlanta, and found out mid-production that those scenes that he loved so much in Prisoners were also filmed in Atlanta.
And then wasn't even the right neighborhood, exactly. So,
So as a kid who grew up in Atlanta, I want to say Atlanta supremacy forever.
yes, well, they are offering all the tax rebates these days. So we're in Maybrook, wherever we are. But Justine Gandy, new third grade teacher, she has shown up for her normal school day, and all but one of her children in her class have not reason that they've disappeared. And if you've seen the trailer, you know this is because at 2:17 the morning prior, they all got up out of their beds. They walked out of their front doors of their houses. They ran off into the darkness. And it says that they never returned. And I don't know if this was on purpose. I tend to think it is. There is a character, one of these children, that figures somewhat importantly into the plot, named Matthew. And in Matthew 2:17, of all places, then what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. This voice was heard in Ramah, wailing in loud lamentation. It's Rachel weeping for her children. It is the sacrifice of the innocents, which functionally kicks off the New Testament story, and it just happens to coincide with the time code of the disappearance of these kids. But now you have a townspeople who are at a loss. How has this happened? Why has this happened? Who is responsible? Who is to blame? How do we move forward from here? So we have a film that from the very beginning is steeped in collective trauma, which it comes upon us into our communities, and there's an assault weapon that appears in a dream. So this grief slashes across our communities and our families, and what do we do about it? Because we do not have answers, and that is, I think, where the premise kicks us off from here. But we start with these character cards, and so maybe we can kind of walk through beat by beat. And so we have begun with this character Justine, played by Julia Garner. It's our second our second in a row Julia Garner film after Fantastic Four. She's quite a bit better in this. In this film, I would say. So thoughts on Justine, the character, as we are introduced to her and her particular role in the proceedings.
Well, she certainly has more to do in this movie than she did in Silver Surfer, which was basically to be silver and to act against a green screen. Um, so this is interesting. So the first place I think that Cregger wants us to talk about is the role of blame, like in grief, right? And so Cregger has said that every character, those ones that we walk through, that he has teased out different grief responses for himself. So those of you who have done like a deep dive in the movie know that he wrote this script in response to the death of a close friend, that he just sort of walled himself up and was writing this. And so each character we meet along the way is a representation of the different avenues that he traveled in his own grief journey. Julia is one, which is not quite a triptych because there are more characters in that, right, in this film. But so it's interesting to watch this as a representation of grief. Like this, Julia is one. And so Julia is that one. I think she comes into the picture blaming, like she is the recipient of the blame. Like, who could have stopped this, or what did you do? I've heard several commentators talk about the idea, like very early in the movie, they're like, well, you're the teacher. The one thing that all of these 17 students had in common was you, so you must have done something. But at the same time, all of these people have these videos of their children leaving the house on these Ring cameras. So they know, like, she wasn't there. She wasn't causing this to happen. It's really hard to get a class full of small children to all do the same thing at the same time. Like, I have been in the family of educators my entire life. Like, that's just massive undertaking to ask. Like, you can't even get 17 out of 18 students to turn in their homework on the same day. But she's troubled, right? And she tries to fix her problems with soothing. So soothing with alcohol, soothing with sex, soothing even with conversation with the one remaining boy. Like, this is what we have gone through together. She is the archetype of people who are looking for the answer to their own grief and pain from outside of themselves, from an external source, right? Mm-hmm. At least in my read of who she is. So if it's not alcohol, if it's not sex, then if I can just like connect with this student, because he and I are the only ones who experience this together. And she's actually not trying to figure out what happened. She's trying to make herself feel better. Mm-hmm. And that's her quest.
I have a quick question for Jeff. You. We may need to talk about this for a second. What do you all think this movie is about? Like, I think I may be way off. I may be over here while I'm like, do you all think that this is about something like addiction or?
I am very much going to make that case. I mean, the first time that we see Justine outside of the first press conference or parent meeting there at the school, we follow her into the liquor store, right? And this is maybe a good chance to call out some of the filmmaking, because what Cregger is doing from the very beginning, his camera is kind of always in motion, and it's either pulling us somewhere we don't want to go, or oftentimes the camera will be attached to a door that's being tried to open, but you'll find that it's locked with a chain or something. So we're stuck in something that we cannot escape. But there is a dynamism to the filmmaking, and from the very beginning, obviously because of the nature of my story and the communities that I walk in, there's something that you have a different kind of sight for. And when the camera is following Justine into the liquor store, it is following someone who knows exactly where they're going, how many paces it takes, which shelf they are accessing, how much it's going to cost. She has been through this before. It is something that is very much it has taken a hold of her in the ways that I have experienced it myself, that I've seen it take hold of others. And so the weaponization in the film for me isn't necessarily addiction, but it is isolation, and it is how we become weaponized against one another and weaponized even against ourselves. So that's my response there, but I don't want to step on you too much there, Jeff.
No, let me just pitch that. Like, maybe it's that I knew what this movie was about during the title card, and the triangle and the circle was exactly what it was, and it didn't hit me at all that it was addiction. That's a sniper scope, is what that is. This movie is about a school shooting. The whole movie is about a school shooting for me, and how blame is issued out afterwards, and how the characters are representative of so much that we're focused on when there's so much there are other demons at work as a world. Where did you all not see that as the dominant theme of this movie?
Here's the thing. Here's my take, Jeff.
Yeah.
Going into it, I knew I was this movie is about a school shooting.
Yeah.
And about like the fallout of all of that. But then I got in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And it was about that and so much more.
True.
Because what I feel like Cregger is doing is there are so many shots that are perspectival or over the shoulder. Right? And so in each, you get a new title card. Here's Julia. Here's Archer. On down the line. Like he wants me to see the world as this character sees the world. And like all of the fallout of whatever it is that they're doing, like even as you're walking through the movie and people are doing stuff, like I'm having realizations about how different folks see the world and are responding to not just like this. I mean, my Substack about this, which was just the first one I did, was about what are we willing to do to sacrifice children, right? But not all of the characters are necessarily dealing with that. Like Alden Ehrenreich's character, I think there is a conversation that Zack Cregger is trying to have about like police violence, right? Like I know one of the questions that police officers ask when they are apprehending someone, when they're arresting someone, is like, do you have anything in your pockets that's going to stick me? Right. And so he's lied to about whether or not that's the case. And he has this moment where he just reacts to James, the character James, and just hits him. And so, okay, question. If I'm the police officer and I've just done something that's really out of character in some ways, but very understandable in other ways. I think Cregger's wanting us to have a conversation about that. Like, is this a bad guy or not?
Okay, so
right?
So when we see the character played by Alden Ehrenreich, so Paul, who Sean's mentioning is the police officer, and this is not the first time that we've met Paul, because Paul shows up in Justine's story, and Justine has texted Paul, with whom she has clearly had some kind of relationship in the past, and Paul has now met her at the bar, and he initially orders a Coke. He's not drinking along with her, and Justine asks Paul, "Does Donna know you're here?" And so, yes, you're
Right.
right, Sean, that in asking James, the addict, do you have anything in your pocket that's going to pick me? He is lied to. But also, Paul has already lied in this film. He has introduced himself as someone whose orientation is out of dishonesty and self-preservation. And when we first see him he's in the locker room and he's talking to Donna on the phone, who is out of town, and this is his partner, and they're trying apparently to have a child in with some difficulty, and she asks him, "Are you going to hit a meeting tonight?" And what that means is, no,
Yeah.
this man is trying to get sober, and he says, well, if I need to, I will. And I'm just telling you, as someone who has struggled with addiction and dishonesty, I know what that answer means. It's like, I'm not going. No, I don't. You're not. You're out of town. I can do anything I want, including go see my ex. And so this is a story about those lies that we tell one another and ourselves, as well, in addition. And that is its own form of violence, as these different stories are all colliding into one another.
Yeah. So like one of the things, he shows up to meet Justine in a bar. What does he think is going to like you've lied to your partner about where you're going to be, and you're going to meet an ex. Um, like he is, and Cregger has talked about the comparison between this character and events in the film Magnolia, for those of you who know that, and characters in that film. So he's playing on a lot of different things. And I think, back to the fundamental question, Cregger is kind of like, is anyone innocent? Is anyone guilty? Right? And how do we meet that out in terms of our own understandings of when everything goes completely south? There is one character in the film who is completely guilty, right? But are they the only one? And can you imagine? Like, I think about that character Paul. Like, man, like what a beatdown, honestly. Like to be a small town cop with this unsolvable problem, working for what is ostensibly your father-in-law, like the powerlessness that most men would feel in that situation. And because the conversation, right, the conversation that Paul has with Donna is about, oh, tell my father we can hang out with them. We can see them at this event this weekend. Like, why don't you tell your father? Like, why? Like, it is this weird triangulation where we meet him, and he is really a powerless character, wanting to do the right thing, but in a moment, it responds as many people would, not everybody, but many people would, and that can jeopardize his whole career. But he, like, is his encounter with Justine, his acting out of, like, I will have some power over my condition. I don't know. This is
And to that point, his story would be a whole lot different if he had gone to a meeting that night. Instead of gone to and seen Justine, he had the option. That's and what people do when they have that choice to draw closer to community in a place of grief, or to pull further into self. I'm going to keep harping on it because I think it's all over the film.
So I'm going to agree with everything you all have said. And I think that the weakness of all of the characters is actually something that's trying to be showcased. And the reason it's trying to be showcased is none of these people are solutions to a primary problem in our culture. A teacher of this sort cannot be the solution to school shootings. Police officers of this sort cannot be the solution to school shootings. Principals of this sort cannot be the solution to school shootings. All these people lack the ability to be there. In that opening monologue, everything is in that opening monologue. top people in this town were so embarrassed about not being able to solve this crime that they covered everything all up. That's the beginning, and it ends with some of the kids came back, but not really. And
Right.
what is being communicated here? What's being communicated here is this problem is systemic and it's bigger than the individuals that we're all saying, pointing our fingers at, saying they can solve the problem. Clearly, it starts that way. What did the teacher do? The teacher's an alcoholic who just wants to get laid and have somebody care about her. Do you think she's going to be able to stop, an individual with an AR-15?
Yeah, the limits of our humanity.
So I suppose that would be, just as the title cards begin to come up, that would be my prism for looking at the title cards. I think everything you're saying is correct, and really what's being said is
you said something there I think is really important, and so we're spoilering now, so we're kind of jumping around. And so this is not something I'd consider. I mean, I thought about this, is probably the most haunting part of it. Very much the same with Prisoners, which everybody should go and watch. I'll say that again for the second time. The kids never recover.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they are saved by what they. So if the end of this movie, which gets talked about a lot, what they had to do to survive, they actually can never recover from.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's such a satisfying ending when you're watching the movie, because you come to face with this wigged, over maked up witch that wants to steal the life force from everybody, which is a little bit on the nose, but okay, fine. But what they had to endure, and we talk about a lot. So let's just take, Jeff, the school shooting angle that you introduced. Let's say that Cregger is doing an allegory on school shootings. The kids who survive don't ever really survive.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's really important to say, because what happens when we have great tragedies is that I am famously on record as saying Mr. Rogers' advice about look for the helpers is just absolute nonsense. Like, look at the help. Like, that is just white mythology nonsense, because there's no point in looking at the helpers. You solve things by looking at the harmers, right? Like, who caused this? And someone doing the barely decent thing of helping out people in tragic instances is not a salve for the kind of harms that we have to endure. And I think if there's anything that I would hope people would take away from is these people, these children, never recover.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't mean they continue to live. Like, they continue to live, but they never recover, because what has been allowed to happen is unrecoverable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you recover from, in the movie, how do you recover from tearing a witch limb from limb? Right?
Well,
but in reality, how do you recover from seeing a classmate shot to pieces?
And I think that's a really good segue to talk a little bit about the character of Archer. So the second of the characters that's introduced via title card is Archer, who is one of the fathers of one of the missing children, played by Josh Brolin, who it should be also said is a very vocally sober person as well. And the character of Archer, I think, is a really interesting analog to where the kids end up, because he is someone who is just so consumed by his grief, his experience, that even the other, he goes to visit another family who may have some ring cam footage that may match his and give them some information. But even then, he's like shoving these people out of the way in their living room as they're looking through this footage, or shoving them out of the way on their sidewalk as he's trying to like triangulate the direction of these kids and kind of match up. And if only he can kind of figure it all out, then something will make sense and then he can move on. But whereas like the kids have a very, very cathartic, visceral end to things, and we'll get to, it's when he is in conversation with this other parent and he's like, how are you doing? And he's like, great, doing great. Well, it's great. He says, we soldier on. It's all we can do.
Yeah.
And it's that sense that we're just going to keep moving forward, knowing that none of us are okay or ever going to be okay. And so much of this film for me is the kids looking around at them and only seeing adults who can do nothing more than to simply soldier on or to numb themselves to move through this world. And this is the world that we have handed over to these kids, whether it's through school shootings, whether it's through the collective checkout of addiction and numbing. This is the world that we're handing to them. And their response rightly is rage.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned Archer. Like, so one of my mentors, tragically lost his daughter, who was born with a lot of challenges when she was 15. And she died when she was 15. She wasn't born when she was 15. And when he talks about that now, I mean, that she passed away in the early 90s. When he talks about that now, he says of his wife that she went to therapy and he went to work. So his response to that was like, to get into the weeds of something as a kind of working out of the thing. So if Archer is an avatar of what Zach Cregger is doing with his own grief, like that's one response, right? Is just so, but for Archer, it's not his regular work, because what we find out through his story is he's like screwing the pooch at his job. Like he's ordering the wrong stuff. He's not taking care of business. But man, he's going to find out what happened to his son, which I think is such a human response. Like if that happened to one of my girls, I could not do anything else besides figure it out. But there is a question about that, about human nature, that we think if we figure it out, then we will have answers. It's very much like God, you don't have to tell me what you're doing, but if you just give me the data, I'll figure it out myself. Like do one or the other. Like tell me what's happening or give me the data. And to live in that liminality of like not knowing, because he's the one that lashes out at Justine at the school. He's the one who paints her car. He's the driving force behind her discomfort. I assume we should believe that he's the one that is the disruption at her door on the night in the first act. But I feel like that's a very fatherly and a very human reaction to grief. Like, I want to figure out what happened. Like, whenever any of us suffer a grief, a loss, our first move is to reestablish the real world, right? Like to try to get back to equilibrium as soon as possible. But our second move is to ask why. So like when my brother died 2 years ago, I really wanted my sister-in-law to do an autopsy because I really wanted to know what happened. As if knowing what happened would somehow make it better. And what I know 2 years hence is like, no, it wouldn't. Like, I know that now, but in that moment, like, tell me what happened. Because if I can have the information, if I can have the data, that seems to offer some sort of soothing. And you don't know that it won't until you're on the far side of grief. Like the loss is the loss. And you just have to go into that cave, regardless.
I think all of this is true. I'm going to be the outlier again. I think that he's trying to say something very different with this character. I think that everyone in this film is myopic. Everyone in this film is very concerned with their own stuff, and they don't care about kids. You have 17 kids run through your house, breaking everything, no one asks what is going on with these kids. Aren't those the kids that have been lost, by the way? On with these kids. Aren't those the kids that have been lost by, And even with the Archer character in going down into the myopic, it's all myopic. And
Yeah. Well, the avatar
myopic,
for that, Jeff, is
myopic.
the guy who is cutting his grass. That's the kids from his like, hey, I'm just gonna keep mowing my grass.
The end of this movie is intentionally hilarious, and I think it's for effect here in that.
So
we don't care about kids, and we brought it up earlier in terms of maybe if it were the case that, say, 17 white kids were shot and killed who were in an elementary school, maybe it would matter to us, and we found out that it doesn't.
Yeah, I thought the 17 number was interesting because Sandy Hook was 27, right? I think that's right. And so,
Look it up.
not to be too on the head, you do 17. And like I said before, like I've always lived with an educator in my house, in my family. And I'm like, where in the world there are only 18 students in a class?
Right.
Like that was my first thought. And plus, there's a great scene where the one child who has survived, and that's made clear why later through the movie, is riding with his dad, like in the front seat. He's sitting in the front seat, and my daughter leans over to me and says, like, why are they letting this kid ride in the front seat of the car? Like, I don't, and it's interesting, like you say that about like not caring about children, but that's a little tell, right? Either this is someone who doesn't have kids or is trying to say something, with Alex sitting in the front seat of the car, being driven by his dad. Like, no third grader in the world should be in the front seat of a car.
And what's his
Right.
question? His question is, did you kiss any supermodels? And I know it's just this silly, goofy question, but I think I see your point. That's not a detail that I caught.
think the three of us know, like, this is why I could never be a director, because their attention to detail is so phenomenal. And in a great storyteller, a good director, nothing that happens in a film is by accident. Nothing.
A lot of that in this movie.
And so when I'm watching a film, I'm thinking, why is that like that? Why is that like that? Like, that's odd. Why? To the point, like, how people are dressed, how their hair is done. Like, there are, even in a film that's relatively inexpensive, like Weapons, it's expensive enough that it's someone's job to decide where to put this kid in the car. And so, to your point, Jeff, like, I do think the meta narrative of this film is, do we give a crap about kids? And the farthest extent of that is Gladys.
Yes.
Absolutely not.
Right.
Right. But everyone else in their own way also doesn't. And then, is that then, Mike, like, this is what addiction, whether it's to a culture, to a constitution, to a substance, the saying that addiction takes you farther than you want to go, keeps you there longer than you want to stay, and costs you more than you'd ever spend. Like, if that kind of, like, to say, like, look what this is costing us. And, like, do you even care?
Well, let me jump in here real quick, Sean, because I know we've got a heart out, and you mentioned her name, but we really need to kind of like set up with a little more comprehensively the character of Gladys, and so we're kind of blowing past here a little bit the characters of James and Marcus, who are somewhat more secondary to the plot, but James very much this addict, this kind of chaotic fool that is kind of pinballing through these proceedings. And even Marcus, he is presented with his partner as walking through the grocery store, and they're just picking between packages of Pepperidge Farm cookies and Fruity Pebble boxes of cereal, and they've got like a tray full of hot dogs. Like they are just like, it's like food and sugar, or more than anything, it is the addiction to comfort and being kind of, again, to your point, Jeff, myopic, and we are in our own world. We're not a part of this, demonic witchcraft that happens, that's going on. But we need to jump into
quick interpretation.
What's that?
Just quick interpretation
Please.
before pivoting to Gladys. Like the principal is a mandatory reporter. He hears about child abuse, neglects it. The
Right.
heroin addict sees the $50,000, doesn't care about 17 kids. He cares about the money. And so the image of not caring about children over and over.
Very
I
good.
suppose that's where I would go, as opposed to, I hear the addiction idea there. And maybe those are, go.
Oh, I think they're
tandem
very
together.
paired. But we're told that only one child in this class has come to school, and this is Alex Lily, and we come to find out that not only does Alex know where these kids are, but they are in Alex's house, because Alex's great aunt Gladys has moved in from parts unknown, and she has systematically not only taken over this home. Justine had witch painted on her car earlier in the film. No, we have a real life witch on our hands, and she has through this incantation, she has abducted these children, and it's because she needs them to feed. That her body, her whole countenance is falling apart in real time. She has taken control of the parents, Alex's parents, and I'll point this out actually, and this is why, having seen the film twice now, I found this film more emotionally resonant. I found it more horrifying the second time, because I knew where they were taking us, where all those places that I don't want to go, that were being pulled from the very beginning. Because the first time we see Alex being questioned by the police, and this is not 3 minutes into the film, we see the back of a head, this shock of red hair. We see Gladys from the very, very beginning of the film, when going in. And so this phantom, this figure that has taken control of things, needs to feed. And so she has abducted these children, who are all now in the basement, and all paths are converging. James and Paul and Justine and Archer, all paths are leading to this house. So kind of thoughts on the setup to the, where we're heading in the climax here?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like, so I would want everyone who's watching or listening to know that the three of us are all mandatory reporters.
Yes.
So if you are, but the thing about that, is that as a mandatory reporter, what you know is you cannot signal to the people that you possibly are reporting that you're going to report them.
Yeah, right.
So I thought, this is a weird conversation to have, but to Jeff's point about myopia, there is this degree in which the adults just don't want to be bothered with all of this, and so I was hoping, because the principal calls in, the parents, and Gladys shows up. There's just not a world, there's not a universe where you're going to interview a child and their legal guardian is going to sit there catatonic while a non-legal guardian answers all of your questions. Like that would just never happen, except a world where stuff like that happens all the time, which is our world, which is, and people say what is the easiest path for me to just get, these kids have gone missing.
That's exactly.
We don't know where they are. What's the easiest path for me to get to the next thing that I want to do? And that is what the movie is saying. Like you asked earlier, Jeff, what this movie is about. And it's clearly about parasites.
Yeah.
That this is how we see one
parasites?
another.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is how we see one another. I will consume you for me. whatever
That's fair.
gifts you have, whatever talents you have, whatever we see it in the dating world right now, online and other places where potential mates are asking one another, what do you bring to the table?
Yeah.
We see it in marriages where, like, I've done this much. Have you done this much?
Hmm.
we I think if there's, like, writ large, anything that Cregger is trying to say is that, is this really the relationship that we want? to have this conversation with a coworker not long ago when I just said, like, is this the kind of relationship that you want, like, between the two of us? um because if it is, like, let's name it. But i think what I think what Weapons is saying is not that we use one another as weapons always, but we have become a people who simply want to extract from one another. And when that extraction is done, like, literally in the, I need something that belongs to this person, or I need a strand of their hair, I need a part of their presence, I need a part of their live reality to make them do what I want them to do, or what best serves my needs. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I suppose I would want to flip the parasite image. I thought I saw it as something living inside of you, eating you away, and there may be a dual nature to how the parasite image functions. But that was, I suppose that's would be my interpretation of what Gladys is. Gladys has been a parasite invited in to the system. Again, Stephen King, there's a very needful things kind of element to that character for me in terms of the devil is here now and is going to turn us completely towards ourselves and our own longings, and that would also go with the addiction imagery.
Well,
And Cregger cites Needful Things as one of the inspirations for what he's doing. Yeah.
so if I may just jump in, this may be my final stand on the addiction reading here. But I mean, everything you're saying is very much the disease of addiction is a parasite. It exists only for its own survival. It cares nothing of the host, and it will consume and lie and cheat and steal and all the things. And we've talked about the dishonesty up to this point, but Gladys for me, and I let me just pause to say, so Amy Madigan, who you may know from Field of Dreams, she shows up out of the blue and gives a stunning, terrifying, what will, I think, go down in the horror pantheon of performances. She is phenomenal in the film as this figure, Gladys, this demonic figure that comes in. And for me, the power is because she is the embodiment of addiction itself. And so, to the point where when Alex is being tasked with getting these things from her classmates, you know, these pieces of their being, and he says, well, and if that makes you feel better, if you feel better, then you'll go home. And she says, yeah, if that works, then I'll go home. And you know,
Right.
and we know that she is lying because she is an addict. She is addiction itself. She is only eating. And the, you know, so the film opens with this George Harrison song, "Beware the Darkness." And, you know, you can look up the lyrics on your own, but the pain that often mingles in your fingertips, beware the thoughts that linger winding up inside your head, the hopelessness around you in the dead of night. It's all about walking in isolation. And for me, the most powerful, the second time I watched the film, I broke down into tears at a point I did not expect. And it's as it's making the third act turn, and there's been an accident that's befallen two of the characters because one has been weaponized and has pursued them through the streets. And so Archer and Justine are at the hospital. And Justine has waited for Archer to be released after having been treated. And Archer's first question to Justine, "How are you?" And it's the first time in the film that any of these main characters has broken out of their myopic, self-centered focus, and it's pointed that Marcus is only seeking himself, James, Paul only seeking themselves, Gladys certainly only seeking themselves, but it's Justine and it is Archer that both make a move toward the other that is also experiencing a shared pain but going about it a different kind of way. And it's really important to me that those are the two characters that survive this whole ordeal. And that for me is the fellowship addiction component. It is the turn to community within the inevitable experience of grief. That for me is something that all of us, whatever our coping mechanism, whatever our personal avenues toward numbing and denying and fleeing pain and discomfort, like we all need that fellowship. And some of us find that in the church, some of us find that in the rooms of AA, some of us find that in our, my hope would be that we find that in our families and in these close networks of loving community. Right. But we all need it. And this is the film that shows just how important that is, because the alternative for each and every one of these characters is destruction.
Yeah. I think that's well said, Mike. And I made the joke both to Mike in person and later on social media about seeing the movie with me and my daughter, which is like seeing a movie with black people is like a horror movie with black people is like a whole other experience, because we will talk to the screen like, don't go in there. Like, we do. I'm sure, like, Malia is sitting to my right, and we're like looking at each other, like in that third act when they go into the house, and we know as an audience that that's where the children are, in the basement of the house, right? And it is the most Joseph Campbell move ever, because we're thinking like, don't go in. But you guys know Joseph Campbell well enough to know the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure in which you seek, right? And it's funny for like story people and cinephiles. It had to end up in this house, and the children had to be in that house, and someone had to go in there, not as Joseph does, like to simply extract something for himself, but to face the final reckoning. That's what's in there. And what is the final reckoning? It is addiction through one character. It is just a parasite through Gladys, the main character. It is the police through another character, right? And it is vacant parents through two other characters. Like, and I don't know how much Cregger is doing on purpose, but I know that in a lot of places that I traffic, when you identify like who needs to get better in the world for children to be safe and secure, it's the world of addiction, it is law enforcement, it is vacant parents, it is parasitic people, right? And all of that is where Archer and Julia have to come together to go into, right? And the best thing about the end of the movie Thunderbolts, right? Even though it's like so cheesy, but like for me, it's like so moving. It's like, oh, like we're really gonna solve this with a hug. we're gonna solve grief and pain with a hug.
But again, we had to go into the void to get there. Yeah. And what we found out is that there is no rescue without community. And we find community in the people that we have made a point of opposing. Right. When we finally get over ourselves, that's where community is. And like that's actually really powerful. Like I told Mike coming out of the theater, because again we saw it together. Like it's the last scene where Archer is running down the street holding Matthew, who we now connect the name to the face in the story.
who has just been a jerk to Alex the whole time. He's like been a horrible kid. And like it is this father running with his broken son. This father who finally came to terms with all I didn't say before, all I wasn't to you before. Oh, like this is the moment. Because I think that's what Cregger is trying. I think ultimately what Cregger is trying to say, like to hold people close and say what you need to say because he's working out his own grief at the loss of his very close friend.
Yeah,
So many layers. So like I said, I thought it was about gun violence when I went in and came out thinking about so many more things.
and what is Archer says as he's cradling Matthew, he says, "No, I failed you," and that's the. I mean, maybe as we're now talking about the ending,
as he's rescuing him,
right? But what is both so thrilling and also so heartbreaking about the ending is that you do have this situation where the adults are useless. And so the kids are all oh, this is up to us. And it begins with Alex stepping across the salt line, inviting the rage of his parents entirely so that he can wind back and get a piece of Gladys's hair to, what did I see? Someone called it the Uno reverse card, to throw that down. And now all of a sudden these kids who have been weaponized against themselves, against their families, against their community, are now weaponized against Gladys, and their deliverance also happens in community with one another. Like the adults aren't going to take care of us. We are going to run through the streets and we are going to pursue this monster and we are going to tear it limb from limb, literally. So it is a moment that is grotesque and cathartic and wonderful and gross and so deeply sad. It is a very I think a master stroke of an ending, which it leads it with that sense of grief that this is what it's come to, that no, it's our kids' job to save themselves because we're not going to do it.
Right.
My last thoughts on this is I did not find the ending satisfying. I found it deeply troubling, and I think that was by design. I love Mike's answer about alcoholism and seeing it through that prism. I came with the prism of I lived in Littleton, Colorado in the spring of 1999, and the thing about school shootings that I know firsthand is we really, really, really cared back then, apparently. And this is a movie about where we've landed. It's about blame and apathy and the inability to name some things that are obviously true. And as the man said, truth is like poetry, and most people effing hate poetry. And the thing about gun violence in our country is that we all support background checks and mental health evaluations and 30-day waiting periods and bans on semi-automatic weapons. These are almost uniformly advocated for. And it's the collective, as Sean, I think, is rightly putting his finger on. It's the fact that we can't collectively come together and be our best selves as a community. We've become so subjective, insular, myopic has been my word, that we are failing to get to those solutions. The image that made me most emotional in this whole thing is the man on his Ring video watching his kid go off over and over and over and over again. And here's the thing that's going to happen for the foreseeable future to countless parents watching the video of their kid leaving their home for the last time over and over and over again, and we don't care. That's what the movie's about.
Powerless over forces that we do not understand.
Yeah. And you're showing the ineptitude of each of the individuals as individuals, and something else needs to happen because the demonic character here is too big.
There is something about that, John. This is really important to say about the nature of art and actually the nature of scripture, because we all know this. Even though I think rank and file folks in our churches don't know this, that the creator of an art is often saying more than they even know that they're saying.
Yeah, right.
When you read scriptures, because of there's a certain view of inspiration that we can have. It goes like, oh, like the Apostle Paul was saying more than he even knew that he was saying. And him knowing him say that he's saying it does not make it more valid or less valid. Because if we were sitting here and there were a fourth square on the screen and it was Zach Cregger, so much of what we've talked about, he would say that's not what he was after. And I've watched 5-6 interviews with him about this movie. And yet it's there on the screen because art is how we work out what's happening in our subconscious. And like we are saying it even when we don't know that we're saying it. And it takes other people to say, to help us connect our own dots sometimes. And I think that's just really, really important for people to know who follow podcasts like this or interested in storytelling and meaning making, that's how it works. So like Mike sees a lens, like I've heard so many interviews with Cregger and he's never once mentioned AA, but like that's the symbol, right? And like he knows, he has to know that's the symbol. So many of the themes that we talked about, like that's what makes this movie great, is that you could talk about any of several themes for an hour and a half and still not talk about the thing that Cregger wants you to talk about. And it's not that it's not there, it's just that it's all there.
Yeah. It's a good word. It's a good place to land. Unless you got last thoughts, Mike.
Well, I'm going to leave us with just one thought. This is from Fear Not, book by Josh Larson, friend, podcaster, writer, and he talks about, these stories are all over Scripture, and whether you're talking about the storms on the sea or the demon legion preying upon this man in the graveyard, these stories, Larson writes, have varied purposes, but they share at least one thing in common. They evoke and consider fear of vengeance and violence, fear of our mortal flesh, fear of faulty minds, fear of a spiritual realm we cannot fully comprehend. And no one really wants to think about these things, bringing up Philippians 4 and leading us to think on what is true and noble and what is right and pure. But this is one of the reasons that the Bible remains a vital document, because it encompasses the entirety of the human experience, both the lovely moments and then even those ghastly moments. And we tend to avoid that category in our day in a lot of ways, but this is an avenue that allows us to enter into conversations about who we are in those private moments, who we are in the dark when those worries and fears prey upon us, because they prey upon us all. And these are the stories that lead us ultimately into, like, as we've talked about, reconnecting with goodness, reconnecting with one another, and seeing our way together through these fears, because that's the only way through. That's why there's 3 guys on that boat.
It's a good word.
Thank you.
Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, Roy Scheider.
It's a good word.
We're going to get to it.
He's Sean Palmer. He's Movie Mike Yeager. I'm Jeff Cook. This has been Sacred Frames. We'll pick up Jaws in 2 weeks. Be well.
Thanks, gents.